At the Grand Los Angeles Auto Expo, the air shimmered with lights, cameras, and the hum of 1,000 conversations. Luxury cars glistened beneath spotlights, each one more expensive than the last. But all eyes were on the stage, where billionaire CEO Victoria Hayes, the youngest automotive innovator in the United States, stood beside her company's newest creation, a prototype engine said to be the future of clean, limitless energy. Yet as the crowd watched, the machine refused to start. Engineers whispered to one another, their confidence draining away under the heat of the moment. Victoria's sharp heels clicked against the stage as she barked orders, her voice echoing through the massive hall. "Try it again! Run diagnostics! We don't have all day." The team scrambled, typing commands and checking wires, but nothing worked. The screen flashed system error again and again. Disappointment rippled through the audience. Investors began murmuring. Cameras zoomed in, and a few critics smirked from the front row. Victoria clenched her jaw, her polished confidence starting to crack. Then, from the very back of the room, a quiet but steady voice cut through the noise. "I can fix it." Heads turned. Standing near the maintenance area was a man who looked completely out of place. Jack Miller, a local mechanic hired to help with the expo's technical setup. His clothes were stained with oil, his boots worn down, his face tired yet calm. He didn't belong among the suits and million-dollar smiles, and everyone knew it. A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Victoria raised an eyebrow, half amused, half irritated. "You?" she asked, crossing her arms. "You're just a garage worker. This is a high-tech prototype worth more than your entire shop." The crowd chuckled again, some even pulling out their phones to record the moment. Jack didn't flinch. He walked closer to the stage, his eyes on the engine, not the laughter. "Machines don't care about money," he said evenly. "They just need someone who listens to them." His words silenced a few whispers, though Victoria rolled her eyes. "Fine," she said with a smirk. "If you think you're so clever, go ahead, but don't break anything, or you'll be paying for it." Jack simply nodded. The security guard hesitated, but stepped aside when Victoria gave a dismissive wave. The mechanic climbed onto the stage, his heavy boots thudding softly against the polished floor. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing hands rough and scarred from years of hard work. He picked up a wrench from a nearby toolbox. One of the engineers had left it behind in frustration. The crowd fell quiet. The room that had been buzzing with energy was now filled with curiosity. Jack leaned over the engine, his movements methodical and sure. He didn't need the digital readouts or the fancy diagnostic screens. His fingers traced wires, joints, and metal seams like a pianist feeling for forgotten notes. Victoria watched him, arms still crossed, trying to look unimpressed but unable to look away. He adjusted a valve, tightened a bolt, and whispered to himself, "It's not power it's missing, it's rhythm." An hour passed. Sweat gathered on Jack's brow, and smudges of grease stained his shirt, but his focus never wavered. The engineers, once skeptical, began inching closer, fascinated by his confidence. The crowd grew restless, some assuming he'd fail just like everyone else. But then something changed. Jack reconnected 2 cables, twisted a final screw, and stepped back. He looked at Victoria and said quietly, "Try it now." She hesitated, then nodded at her lead engineer. The man pressed the ignition button. At first there was silence. Then a low hum began to rise, steady and powerful. The lights on the console blinked green. The hum deepened into a thunderous roar, filling the entire hall with the unmistakable sound of life. The crowd gasped. Phones shot up into the air, recording every second. The impossible engine was running, smooth, balanced, and stronger than ever. Victoria's lips parted in shock, her disbelief slowly turning into awe. Jack just smiled faintly, his hands resting on the edge of the machine like a proud craftsman admiring his work. When the sound finally died down, the applause was instant and overwhelming. People who had mocked him moments ago were now cheering. Victoria stepped closer, her tone soft, humbled. "How did you do that?" she asked. Jack looked up at her, his voice low but certain. "You were trying to force it to work," he said. But machines, like people, don't respond to force. They respond to understanding. For a moment, Victoria had no words. The billionaire CEO, who had built her empire on control and precision, now stood silent in front of a man who fixed her failure with intuition and heart. The irony wasn't lost on her. She extended her hand slowly, and Jack hesitated before shaking it. "You've just saved my company's reputation," she said quietly. He smiled. "I wasn't saving your company," he replied. "I was just helping the machine find its voice." Later that evening, as the expo wrapped up and the journalists rushed to write their headlines, Victoria found herself watching Jack from afar. He was packing his tools, ready to disappear into the crowd again. For reasons she couldn't explain, she called out, "Jack!" "Wait," he turned, surprised. She walked up to him and said, "You ever think about working for someone like me?" Jack chuckled softly. "No," he said. "I prefer fixing what others give up on." She smiled for the first time that day, genuinely. "Maybe that's exactly what this industry needs, someone who doesn't give up." Jack nodded, tipped his cap, and walked out into the fading California sunset, the roar of the engine still echoing behind him. That night, Victoria Hayes couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his words in her mind. Machines don't respond to force, they respond to understanding. For the first time in years, the billionaire realized that brilliance doesn't always come with a degree or a suit. Sometimes it comes from the dirt, the sweat, and the quiet strength of someone who refuses to quit. And somewhere in a small-town garage outside Los Angeles, Jack Miller sat beside his daughter, telling her about the moment the whole world finally listened to a poor mechanic who dared to believe he could do the impossible. Minutes turned into an hour, and every second felt heavier than the last. The massive expo hall, once alive with laughter and chatter, now stood in uneasy silence. The audience leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the grease-stained mechanic working quietly on the billionaire's prized engine. Jack Miller's hands moved with calm certainty, every motion deliberate, every sound echoing through the space like a clock ticking toward fate. Sweat rolled down his neck, but he didn't seem to notice. Around him, the world had gone still, a test of will between one man's experience and an empire's pride. Victoria Hayes stood near the edge of the stage, her polished shoes tapping impatiently against the floor. She had spent years building her reputation, the youngest CEO in California's tech automotive industry, the woman who transformed a failing company into a billion-dollar empire. And now, all that prestige seemed to hang by a thread because of a broken engine and the hands of a man who smelled like motor oil and gasoline. She didn't know whether to laugh or to worry. The crowd, restless and skeptical, had already written him off as a desperate fool. But Jack didn't care about the cameras, the suits, or the whispers. To him, it was just another machine, another challenge whispering a puzzle to be solved. He touched the surface of the metal casing, feeling the faint tremor beneath. "You're choking," he muttered under his breath, as if speaking to an old friend. His fingers adjusted a valve, rewired a connection, and cleaned a sensor that no one else had thought to inspect. It wasn't just skill, it was instinct, born from years of fixing cars that others said were beyond saving. The lead engineer, watching from the sidelines, frowned. "What's he even doing?" "That's not in the manual." Victoria didn't respond. Her arms were still crossed, but her eyes were locked on Jack. There was something in his focus, a quiet confidence that made even her ego hesitate. She didn't want to admit it, but part of her wanted him to succeed. Because deep down, she was tired of everyone failing her. The crowd's murmur rose again as Jack reached for the ignition. "Let's see if you're ready," he whispered, placing a hand on the engine as though it were alive. Then he turned the key. For a split second there was silence, a silence so thick that it felt like time had stopped. And then, roar. The engine came alive with a thunderous growl, flawless and powerful. The sound filled the hall like a heartbeat, returned to a dying giant. It purred, steady and strong, every cylinder moving in perfect rhythm. Gasps rippled through the audience. Reporters dropped their jaws. Phones shot up to record the moment. Victoria's confident smile froze, not in arrogance this time, but pure disbelief. Her eyes widened as the impossible became real right before her. The engineers scrambled around the machine, checking readings, staring at their screens in awe. "It's stable! It's actually running!" one of them shouted, but the crowd barely heard him. They were too busy watching Jack, who just stood there, calm and unshaken, wiping his hands with a rag as though he'd just changed a tire, not resurrected a billion-dollar prototype. Victoria stepped forward slowly, her heels clicking against the metal floor. She stopped a few feet from him, her voice quieter now. How did you do that?" she asked, her tone stripped of superiority, replaced with something closer to wonder. Jack looked at her, eyes steady but kind. He set down his wrench and said the words that would echo across social media and business circles for weeks to come. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the hands that build are wiser than the minds that boast." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Then the thunderous applause. The audience erupted, clapping and cheering for the man they had laughed at only minutes before. Some even whistled and shouted his name. Victoria stood frozen, her expression unreadable. But then she did something no one expected. She smiled. Not her usual calculated, confident smile, but something real. Slowly she extended her hand to him. Not out of pride, not out of pity, but out of respect. Jack hesitated, then took her hand. It was firm, sincere, and full of unspoken understanding. Cameras flashed, capturing the handshake, a symbol of humility meeting greatness. To the watching crowd, it was the perfect story. A poor mechanic teaching a billionaire a lesson in respect. But to Victoria, it was more personal. She had built her empire believing that intellect ruled everything, that emotion and intuition had no place in innovation. But in that moment, staring at Jack, she realized how wrong she'd been. "Where did you learn that?" she asked quietly once the crowd's cheers began to fade. Jack smiled faintly. "My father taught me," he said. "He used to fix engines in a shed behind our house. He told me, machines talk to you if you're patient enough to listen." Victoria nodded slowly, her gaze softening. "Seems like I've been too busy talking to listen," she admitted, half to herself. That night, after the expo ended and the crowd had gone, Victoria found herself sitting alone on the stage beside the now silent engine. The air smelled of oil and metal. She replayed the moment over and over, his calm voice, his certainty, the roar of the engine. For the first time in years, she felt something she couldn't describe. Humility, maybe, or admiration. Somewhere in the background, Jack packed up his tools, preparing to leave. "Jack!" she called. He turned around, surprised. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "You ever think about working for someone like me?" she asked. Jack chuckled lightly. "No," he said. "I work for the machines. They're honest." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "Well, if you ever change your mind, my door's open." He nodded politely, then tipped his head. "Thank you, ma'am. But I think I'm better off fixing what people forget about." With that, he walked toward the exit, his silhouette framed by the fading golden light spilling through the expo's glass walls. Victoria watched him go, realizing that what he said wasn't just about engines. It was about people, too. She'd spent her life chasing perfection, trying to prove she was the smartest in the room. But that night, she learned something greater. Wisdom doesn't always wear a suit or come with a degree. Sometimes it wears oil-stained gloves and carries a wrench. In the days that followed, the story of the poor mechanic who saved the billionaire's engine went viral. Every news channel covered it. Headlines read, "Local mechanic teaches billionaire CEO a lesson in humility." Victoria was asked dozens of times about her thoughts on Jack. Her response was always the same. "He reminded me what innovation really means, understanding before control." Weeks later, Jack returned to his small-town garage, the same place where dreams often died and hard work barely paid the bills. But something had changed. His daughter, who'd watched the news clip at school, hugged him tightly that evening. "You're famous, Dad," she laughed. Jack smiled, brushing her hair from her face. Fame doesn't matter, sweetheart. What matters is doing what's right, even when people laugh. And that night, as the sun dipped below the California hills, Jack looked out at the horizon, the sky streaked in orange and gold, and smiled to himself. Somewhere in a tall glass tower in Los Angeles, Victoria Hayes did the same. Two very different worlds, bound by one lesson. Respect isn't earned by power or money. It's earned by understanding.